Aloha and welcome back to Jesus at the Beach, where we look at true stories in the Bible that have Jesus at a beach doing some pretty incredible things. Our scripture for today is going to be John chapter 21, starting with verse 4. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll go ahead and start to talk about it. So again, we're in John chapter 21, starting with verse 4. It says, "Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, 'Friends, haven't you any fish?' 'No,' they answered. He said, 'Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some.' When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It's the Lord!' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It's the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. So there are a couple things right off the bat when we are looking at this story that we need to talk about. One is why didn't the disciples recognize Jesus when he was at the shore? Now, it says they weren't far from shore, about 100 yards. One of the things is that if you stand on one end of a football field and you look at the other end of the football field, you may or may not be able to recognize somebody who you know who's standing on the other side. My eyesight might not be what it used to be, but even for you, it could be understandable that you might not be able to clearly recognize somebody who's standing that far away. But the other part is that Jesus has been resurrected at this point. Jesus is in his resurrected body, and it looks a little different. You remember the encounter that Jesus had when he met the disciples and he walked through the wall. His body was different. It was still Jesus, and they could see that it was Jesus, but it was different. So you put those two things together. Jesus was about 100 yards away, and he's in his new body. Maybe you could understand why it would be hard for the disciples to recognize that it was Jesus. I know that when I first read it, I was like, look, the disciples had spent 3 years or more with Jesus as he was doing ministry. I would be able to recognize my good friend Jesus. Why can't they recognize their good friend Jesus? But again, you put those two things together, you can maybe give them a pass, maybe give them a good reason why they might not have been able to recognize Jesus. So the second thing is that there are a lot of things going on in this story. First of all, Jesus asks them, have they caught any fish? Now, the disciples had left their jobs as fishermen to follow Jesus. Do you remember? Jesus called Simon, Peter, and he said, hey, drop your nets. And he said to his brother Andrew, drop your nets and come and follow me. And they did. Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men, is what Jesus said. And they did just that. They left their jobs. They followed Jesus. They're back doing their job now. Because Jesus had died, they went back to what they knew. They went back to what they were comfortable with. So Jesus asks them, hey, have you caught any fish? Now, you might think maybe they were rusty, but you don't just forget how to fish when you spend your entire life being a fisherman. So they still knew what they were doing, but they were out there, they were trying to fish, and they haven't caught a thing all day. So Jesus calls out to them and says, hey, listen to me. If you just cast your nets to the other side of the boat, you're going to be able to catch some fish. Now imagine this. Imagine being a pretty good expert in your field and having some random person on the shore, because again, they didn't recognize it was Jesus, say, hey, why don't you just do this other thing? Why don't you just tweak it a little bit and you'll be able to find the fish that you're looking for? Now, as an expert in my field, I would have thought, you know what? What are you doing telling me how to do my job? But in fact, Jesus, again, knows what's going on, and so he tells his disciples all about what they were supposed to do. And so they listen. And that's incredible, right? Some random person tells you to do something. Maybe they thought, we got nothing to lose. Whoever this guy is, maybe he knows something that we don't. So they listen. They cast it over. They realize who it was that told them to cast their nets on the other side. They obeyed what Jesus said. Then they realize exactly who this was, because Jesus has that kind of power. Jesus is the kind of person that makes miracles happen. And so that's kind of our main point for today, is that when we obey Jesus, he blesses our faith. He makes the incredible things happen. We need to step out in faith a lot when Jesus asks us to do something, because Jesus asks us to do some really difficult things. We sometimes are experts in our field, right? We know who we are. We know what we're good at. We know what maybe we're not great at. God calls us to do certain things in our lives that maybe you and I aren't really comfortable with. Maybe it's the fact that God tells us to go and make disciples. And you're like, Ben, I'm not good at just talking to people. Well, Jesus still says, do it. God commands us to do those things. So even though you may have difficulty doing something like discipleship, making disciples, Jesus says, cast the net on the other side. Just do it anyway. And see how I'm going to bless your life when you follow what I instruct you to do, when you follow my commandments. And so that's what I want you to do this week. I want you to learn from the disciples. Think about, what is God asking you to do? What is Jesus commanding you to do? And even though it might be something that you already feel you're good at, maybe you're not getting the kind of results because you're not really following what Jesus is saying. Trust in what Jesus has to say. Cast your net on the other side of the boat. And when you do, good things will happen. Amazing things can happen. God will grow you and stretch you, and your faith will become deeper and deeper as you follow Jesus. So, that's all I've got for this week, and I'll see you next time. Hey, here's a bonus. In this story, you see Peter just jump out of the boat so he could swim to see Jesus. He was that excited to see his friend Jesus. That is a part of the story that is always one of my favorite parts. And the fact that he, as a fisherman, left all the fish that he just caught just so that he could spend some time with Jesus, while the rest of the disciples are trying to haul in all those other fish that they just caught. So that's just kind of a fun part of the story that I forgot to kind of tell you about, but it's a really great part of the story that reminds us spending time with Jesus is a pretty amazing thing. We should drop what we do and spend some time with Jesus. So do that this week too.